Welcome back. In this module, we're going to talk about why UX is so darn important. So why does user experience design matter so much? Well, there are a few simple answers to that question. UX matters because a good experience is worth repeating. I'm sure all of you have run into bad experiences where you have abandoned ship and never come back. Or they end in such frustration that you don't want to be part of that experience any longer. Whether you don't like the brand or don't want to visit that place, bad experiences leave a bad taste in users' mouths. And a good experience creates advocacy, creates word of mouth. Good experiences are worth repeating, and that is why user experience design matters so much. Also, ultimately, these days especially, return on investment is the biggest driver in investments in user experience design. I've read a number of studies on this, but some reputable studies show that $1 invested in user experience design results in a 100x return. Return on investment hasn't always been the focus of web design and development. Dial things back about 20 years in the late 90s. Companies wanted websites just because they needed to get involved in the digital space. They needed a presence. They wanted their company to be available online in case someone wanted to go to it. But they weren't really thinking about the experience of it. They just wanted a presence. As soon as they started thinking about how people would interact with their brand, that's where experience started to matter. A return on investment could mean many things, however. Considering, though, these days that return on investment is so important, we have to understand that there always is one, and it is measurable. Now, you may be asking yourself, how could we have a return on investment for a site that doesn't have a transactional purchase? Well, I'll explain that in just a second, but we measure success based on so many different key performance indicators and metrics that it doesn't just have to be about money. So what is ROI, and how do we quantify it if it isn't driven by purchases and monetary return? Let's dig into that a little bit further. Return on investment can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. But we need to know how we've succeeded, and that's why return on investment is so important for user experience design. We also need to know how we define success. If we can't consider return on investment or the metrics related to that, how are we able to measure success? How do we define done? Also, what can be an acceptable return? What do we know are acceptable returns for our investment? All of these things need to be considered when investing in user experience design services. And lastly, we need to know how to measure this success. And without understanding the metrics around it, how are we going to do it? Take a look at this diagram and tell me what you see. Does this ring a bell for anyone? What we're showing here are two conversion funnels. This represents the user's path through predetermined steps. On the left, we see a diagram called member sign-up completion that tracks the user's steps through a user experience. On the right, we see an experience called checkout, and that funnel tracks the users through steps in the Google purchase path. We're not going to get into the details of the specifics around these funnels. This is meant to introduce this idea to you of conversion rate, conversion funnels, paths that we expect the users to take. This should be at the center of your experience. We need to understand what a website or an app is trying to accomplish. And it's represented by this visualization. Conversion is the absolute most important activity that a user should accomplish. The completion of an activity that is important to the success of your business, such as a completed sign-up or a purchase. Conversions are unique to each website and are tied to specific goals. Really, what this means is that we are trying to get users to do specific things in our experiences. And once they achieve those goals, we are effectively converting them either into customers or into completed purchasers, or we're converting them into advocates or owners of our brand. So how do we determine what a conversion point is? For any experience, we need to understand what the goals of that product are. If your client is interested in selling merchandise, then the ultimate goal of that website or experience will be to make a sale. If your client is a content-driven website, like a magazine or a newspaper, then perhaps the goal isn't about making a purchase. Perhaps the goal is about reading an article or downloading an issue. So what are some other examples of goals? I'd like you to pause the video and write down as many goals as you possibly can think of. Don't hold back, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Now that you're back, let me share a few goals that I've come up with to help steer the conversation. Goals in the digital space can vary widely, depending on your client and what their needs are. Let's take a look at some of the ones in my list. A purchase is the most obvious one. The majority of e-commerce sites survive by generating revenue. And without a purchase, there is no revenue. And repeat purchase becomes equally as important when it comes to experience design. And a repeat purchase eventually accumulates into what we call customer lifetime value. That is also a measurement in the digital space that is quite important to most retailers. Moving away from retail, a page view may be equally as important to your customer. Or even time spent on a page or time spent on a website. If you don't have a transactional e-commerce website, you need to measure the success of your site based on other tangible metrics. A click on a specific link or a specific link to or from your website may be as important as a purchase on a non-transactional site. A download of a document, of an article, of a piece of media might be equally as important for your business. Watching a video is also a potential goal in the digital space for a new product or a new campaign or a new service offering. Something a little more obvious would be a sign-up, either for some sort of newsletter or an email list, a registration for an account, or a specific event might be something that's measured in the digital space. A rating or a review is another really popular one for consumer packaged goods websites. They thrive on user-generated content. Another prominent goal that I see with the majority of my clients is social engagement. And a social share by one of your users is a very important goal to accomplish on your website. Or, similarly, a social follow may be a very important key performance indicator when it comes to the success of your product. And finally, to wrap up my list, a save for later or a bookmark or some way of acknowledging that this is an important site. That is absolutely a goal that could be generated for a non-transactional site. So don't hold back. There might be a few more. And if there's some that I missed from this list, please send me a message. I would love to update this with all of your great ideas or provide feedback on your specific lists. In the digital space, we need to take care of our users. Users are the most important part of experience design. It's called user-centered design because users are at the center of our experience. We think about their motivations and behaviors and their intent in accomplishing some specific goal that leads them to a conversion point. The user is at the center of our decision, which means that all of the influence should come from that central point. That doesn't mean we discount what our clients are looking for when it comes to their product objectives, but the balance needs to start at the user side. Remember, though, that you are not your user. And as much as your opinion matters, and your research and specific benchmarking of best in class is quite important to the contribution of the experience, you shouldn't be making the decisions blindly. Take the time to research who your user is, who they want to be, and how they want to accomplish specific tasks. That will allow you to craft the best experience for them. User-centric design follows a specific methodology that we'll be reviewing in this class. But let me illustrate a few of the tasks that go along with keeping the user at the center of your process. In this illustration, we would start with stakeholder interviews, take some time and understand who these specific stakeholders are, whether they're on the product side or on the user side. And then we'll dig deep into research and analysis of competitors and specific best-in-class processes for that industry vertical. After we assemble the information and research from our stakeholders and from other third parties, we would determine our design strategy or how we are going to solve the design problem. At that point, we'll iterate, we'll prototype, we'll sketch, we'll try things, we'll test, and we'll create something that will lead us to a visual design where we incorporate brand assets into our prototype. Now, our prototype is likely going to be broken down into wireframes, information design aspects, and functional elements. Once we layer on the visual design, it's time to move things over to front-end development and then product testing. If we can layer in product testing with real users of your product, that provides the best insight into whether we're making the right decisions. Minding your users also means that these experiences must be cohesive, intuitive, and hopefully engaging. That means the difference between satisfaction and pleasure, of course, as we mentioned earlier. Sometimes, however, there are competing priorities. And to be frank, it's most of the time. Let me explain that a little bit further. Competing priorities are typically found on the client side or at the product side of our experience, although it does specifically occur on the user side as well. If you have a disparate type of users, or you're designing at scale, meaning that your design needs to cover the vast majority of a population, then you need to think about the lowest common denominator, which means you need to think about the most basic interaction that a user would experience. Most of the time we look to the least educated technical person, and we make sure that that's understood in the experience. Or we think about the most experienced technical person and how can we make it the most efficient for them without slowing down others. Competing priorities on the client or customer side means that we see stakeholders from different departments thinking that different things are more important. That usually leads to a little bit of conflict, but that's what designers do best, solving problems. So I encourage you to take all of these competing priorities in hand and solve the problem based on your research. And finally, simplify, simplify, then simplify again. This, of course, is a quote by Jakob Nielsen himself when asked at the end of an interview, can you give some advice to up-and-coming designers who are getting into experience design? And he said, okay, I'll give you 3 pieces of advice. Simplify, simplify, then simplify.